Now, this gets a little confused here, so please let's understand as I'm going to try to give this right perspective. He says, to the Yehudim, I became as a Yehudite, that I might win the Yehudim. To those who are under Torah, so as to win those who are under Torah. To those without Torah, as without Torah, not being without Torah toward Elohim, but under Torah Messiah, so as to win those who are without Torah. To the weak I became weak, so as to win the weak. To all men I became as all, so as to save some by all means. So basically, either we're not understanding this, or Paul just completely just said, I'm a lying charlatan who became anything to anybody to get what I wanted. Isn't that what he just said? It certainly looked like it, if you're going to read it that way. He's saying, you ready for this? I believe he's saying this. This is my opinion. Okay, because I do this every day. When I'm talking to somebody who's been in the body for 12 years, I don't speak to them the same way as someone who's been in the body for 5 minutes. I adjust knowing where they're at, knowing where I'm at, so I can help them meet them where they are. So it's not like he actually became. He said, I thought, here, my thought process when I'm talking to a Jew was different than when I was talking to a Gentile. Because I know where they're coming from, so I talk to them from that perspective. I didn't become a worldly person to talk to worldly people, to try to win them over. How's that winning anybody over? It means you stand for nothing, right? But I believe what he's simply saying is, I want you to know, because he's talking to the audience that's really questioning who he is, I may look a little weird to you when I talk to people in this group, and I sound a little different than when I talk to people in this group, because I have to meet them conversationally, instructionally, where they are. I'm not going to act like they act. I'm not going to become a Jew when I'm talking to Jews and those that are worldly when I talk to people that are worldly. But I'm going to understand that I have to shift my perspective and my approach as I speak, knowing where they're coming from. Does that make more sense now? So he was using wisdom, which, by the way, if you learn anything about speaking, or if you learn about sales, one of the things that they teach you is the more you can align yourself in the perspective of your customer or the person you're working with, then you'll understand how to communicate with them. The more you understand where they're coming from. If you've never been, for example, let's say your whole life you've been American, and then all of a sudden you find out you got relatives from, say, I don't know, Eastern Europe. Culture's very different, or maybe from Asia somewhere, or maybe from wherever, a place that's very different culturally than you used to. Guess what? You might have a little problem communicating with those people because you don't understand where they're coming from, because it's a different perspective than you have as an American all your life, and maybe generationally American. So you have a problem in your communication at times because of the perspective, all right? When I talk to my wife's siblings, some of them are still very Eastern European in their mindset, certainly her parents. And I have to remember that I'm not communicating with the way I'm seeing things to them, and they're gonna see it the same way. I gotta understand how they're looking at things to try to communicate. Talk to my parents, no problem, because my parents have the same background I have. Now, there's other problems because they're parents, and when you talk to your own parents, you have problems. But not in terms of the understanding and perspective when you're trying to communicate. So Paul's saying, look, when I talk to a Jew, I can't talk to a Jew the way I'm talking to a Corinthian comes from a Greek mindset or wherever they're coming from. They don't understand where the Jew's coming from. And when I talk to someone who's been under the Torah, who understands Torah, I can talk to them from a Torah observant perspective. And someone who's never had the Torah, I got to talk to them as a person who has no understanding of all of that. How else am I going to communicate? When I'm talking to someone that's kept kosher, keeps the Sabbath, keep the feast, and all these other things, I can talk to them in a whole different way than someone who says, what's a feast? What's kashrut? Well, okay, I have to start in a different place, approach it in a different way. True? All right? So that's what Paul's saying here. He's not saying I was a chameleon and deceived people. I adjusted to people is what he's saying. I adapted so I could bring the message of the good news in a way they could receive it where they were at that moment. You hear me from the microphone. You'll hear sometimes when I'm talking, I'll give an example of something, then I'll give 4 or 5 other ways of saying the same thing, because I don't know which one you're going to receive. I don't know which group of people you're in, so to speak. So I may say the same thing multiple ways. He does the same thing in the way he brings the scripture around, because he doesn't know which way he's going to reach you at that moment, because it's such a wide audience coming from all kinds of backgrounds. But when you come and meet with me one-on-one, elders watch this every time. I will find a way to figure out where you're coming from so I can bring the message across in your perspective. That is the role of a good communicator teacher, is to understand where is the student coming from so I can communicate in a way that will make sense to the student. I'm not going to water anything down. I'm not going to become worldly instead of this, or I'm not going to become all Jewish because of that. I'm still going to be me, but I got to understand who I'm talking to and put it in the perspective that makes sense to them. And that's all he's saying here, okay? So when he says to the weak, I became weak, as to win the weak. He didn't say he became weak, meaning my mindset had to go to what would a weak person be feeling, thinking, and understanding at this point so I can reach them. I don't think at any moment ever in Paul's life he was weak, okay? Doesn't come across to me as someone who's weak. But look, when I'm so strong, most of the time, if I'm talking to you and you're dealing with something weak, I sometimes have to then tone it way down and kind of get to understand where your perspective is to bring you back up. And say, hey, you're going to have to strengthen this up, okay? That's what Paul's trying to do here. Why? He says, to all men I become all so as to save some, by all means. In other words, to give them a message that they might actually receive. Not that he's actually saving anybody, but it's his job to give them the opportunity by sharing the information that they can then, once they receive the information, have a choice to do or not do with it.